Good afternoon, or good morning, and welcome to this public briefing of the Standing Committee on Social Development. My name is Kieran Testart. I'm the MLA for Range Lake and the acting chair of the Standing Committee on Social Development. I'll now ask members to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Ms. Morgan.
Good morning. I'm Shauna Morgan, MLA for Yellowknife North. Happy to be here this morning.
Good morning. MLA for Frame Lake, Julian Morse.
Thank you. Now we'll go to members online. We'll start with Mr. Nersu.
Good morning. My name is George Nersu, MLA for the Mackenzie Delta.
Ms. Yakalaya. Hawkins. He's dropped off. Okay, well, if those members want to chime in later, we have them on, they have attended. There may be some technical issues, but thank you for the introductions. We'll now receive a briefing on educational supports with the Honourable Caitlin Cleveland, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment, and departmental officials. Please note, this meeting is being live streamed on the Assembly's social media channels, and I will remind all members and witnesses to direct all questions and comments to myself as chair and wait to be recognized before speaking. We'll now pass it over to Minister Cleveland. Please proceed with your presentation, Madam Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and huge thank you to yourself and committee for having me here today. I believe in the room with you, you have Jamie Fulford, Deputy Minister of Education, Culture and Employment, as well as Shauna Coleman, who's the Director of School Services for JK to 12. And you also have Matthew Milovanovic. It's a tongue twister for me, and Matthew is the Director of Early Childhood and Early Learning. In addition, you have Kim Stewart, who's the Senior Advisor to the Deputy Minister, as well as Nigel Woodrich, who is my Special Advisor. So a huge thank you to committee for hosting us here today. Today, we'll provide an update along with the Department of Education, Culture and Employment on school services for junior kindergarten to grade 12 education system, with particular focus on Jordan's Principle and Inuit Child First Initiative. These federal programs play a vital role in ensuring that First Nations and Inuit children have equitable access to the services they need. Within our schools, they help remove barriers and ensure that culturally appropriate, student-centered support is available when and where it is needed. Today, through Deputy Minister, through a presentation that we will provide, we will speak to the impact of recent federal changes on these programs, how education bodies and education, culture, and employment have responded operationally, and our go-forward plan to ensure continuity of services into the 2025-2026 school year. So I very much look forward to being able to provide this public presentation, but also field questions from committee members, and am very grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation in public. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. And Mr. Fulford, you can begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And will the presentation be brought up on the screen? Okay, great.
And when you're clicking, just point out that don't.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
There you go.
All right. So in this presentation, this is the overview slide. We'll speak to Jordan's Principle, the Inuit Child First Initiative, federal funding in NWT schools, the impact of federal changes, operational response to date, and planning for the 25-26 school year. So Jordan's Principle is a federally mandated program that ensures First Nations children, both on and off reserve, receive the health, social, and educational services they need without delay. It was established following a 2007 motion in the House of Commons and has since been reinforced by rulings from the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. The principle is simple but powerful: put the child first. That means services must be provided immediately, and any jurisdictional disputes between governments are resolved afterward. The scope of support is broad. It includes things like healthcare, mental health services, special education, and assistive devices. It's administered by Indigenous Services Canada, with oversight from First Nations leadership and those involved in the original human rights complaint. Jordan's Principle is a critical tool in ensuring equity for First Nations children, and it plays an important role in how we support students across the Northwest Territories. Moving on to the Inuit Child First Initiative. That initiative is a federal program that ensures Inuit children across Canada can access the services and supports they need, whether that's in healthcare, health, education, or social care. While it's similar to the purpose of Jordan's Principle, ICFI was developed in response to Inuit-specific advocacy and is tailored to reflect Inuit culture and regional contexts. It's not the result of a legal ruling, but rather a recognition of the need for a distinct approach. The services covered are broad, ranging from medical and mental health supports to educational tools and culturally appropriate care. It's administered by Indigenous Services Canada in partnership with Inuit organizations to ensure that delivery is respectful, responsive, and grounded in Inuit ways of knowing. At its core, ICFI is about equity and culturally safe care, recognizing that Inuit children have unique needs and that service delivery must reflect their identities, their communities, and governance structures. Families and educational bodies are responsible for applying directly to Indigenous Services Canada, or ISC as it's commonly known, for supports under Jordan's Principle and the Inuit Child First Initiative. The Department of Education, Culture and Employment does not oversee or track individual applications. However, ECE does receive summary reports from ISC that outline the total funding allocated to each education body, along with types of positions and services requested. As of the 24-25 school year, education bodies across the NWT have collectively accessed over $211.9 million in federal funding through Jordan's Principle and ICFI since 2018. These funds have been instrumental in providing essential supports to students and schools throughout the territory. In the 2023-24 school year, education supports such as support assistance represented the largest category of approved requests in the NWT. To the impact of federal changes, on February 10th, 2025, Indigenous Services Canada announced changes to the operating procedures related to processing requests under Jordan's Principle, and on March 22nd announced continued Jordan's Principle funding for the 2025-26 year. Recent updates to the operating procedures for Jordan's Principle and ICFI are aimed at ensuring long-term stability, sustainability, and improving clarity for families and service providers. The new procedures provide clear guidance on what services are eligible and what documentation is required. They also define ineligible items, which now include things like home purchases, renovations, sporting events, international travel, childcare, clothing, furniture, vehicles, and general school-related requests. However, there may be exceptions if a request is tied to substantive equality, meaning it addresses a specific barrier or need that impacts a child's ability to access services equitably. Importantly, school-related funding is no longer approved unless it's directly linked to a child's health, social, or educational need. Requests for support in off-reserve or private schools are now being redirected to provincial or territorial programs. Finally, the definition of urgent requests has been clarified. These must now align with the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal's interim definition of urgency to be considered for expedited support. These changes are significant, and we're working closely with education bodies and families to ensure they understand the new process and can continue accessing the supports they need. Impact of federal changes. The recent administrative changes to Jordan's Principle have had a significant and immediate impact on schools across the Northwest Territories. We've already seen denied requests. As of August 5th, 2025, funding for 81 support assistant positions for the upcoming school year have been formally rejected by ISC. These positions were critical to supporting students with complex needs, and the denial of these positions will impact Commission Scolaire Francophone, DTNO, Satu Divisional Education Council, and Yellowknife District Number 1. In addition, there are pending requests for an additional 93 support assistant positions that remain unanswered. This delay in decision-making is creating uncertainty for Beaufort Delta Divisional Education Council, Satu Divisional Education Council, South Slave Divisional Education Council, and Delo Divisional Education Authority as they try to plan for the year ahead. Not all regions are experiencing denied Jordan's Principle requests equally. This variation is likely due to differences in how applications are framed, how ISC regional and national offices interpret the guidelines, and when requests were submitted. Some education bodies may also have stronger relationships with ISC, allowing for more dialogue and clarification. These disruptions are contributing to increased inequities in our education system. Jordan's Principle was never supplemental in the North. It has been essential to ensuring Indigenous students receive the supports they need to succeed. Without timely and adequate funding, the gap in services between communities will only widen. Finally, we are seeing growing uncertainty in planning and staffing across education bodies. Schools are unable to confirm staffing levels or finalize programming, which affects not only hiring, but also the ability to deliver consistent, high-quality support to students from day one of the school year. When requests for support are delayed or left unanswered, it places schools, families, and students in a state of limbo. The lack of clarity around approvals creates significant anxiety for all of those involved. Timely and transparent responses are not just administrative necessities, they are foundational to effective planning and service delivery. When we know what supports are available, we can plan proactively, allocate resources wisely, and develop contingencies that ensure no child is left behind. Operational response education bodies. In responding to ongoing financial uncertainty, education bodies have implemented a series of operational measures to mitigate risk and ensure continuity of core educational services. This includes realigning programs and operations, managing salary obligations for potentially affected employees, and eliminating non-essential expenditures such as travel and in-person professional development. Training has shifted to virtual formats to reduce costs, and staffing has been reduced through attrition where possible, with teaching positions now strictly aligned to territorial funding allocations. These actions reflect a broader trend across education bodies, many of which are taking similar steps to manage financial pressures. While we are unable to provide specifics about each region, the sector-wide approach is to maintain service delivery while navigating funding challenges. These decisions, though difficult, are necessary to maintain stability and support students and staff during this transitional period. While deeply unfortunate, layoffs have become an operational necessity in response to the recent changes to Jordan's Principle. With funding for key positions, particularly support assistants, either denied or still pending, education bodies have been forced to make difficult staffing decisions. These layoffs are not a reflection of performance or need, but rather a direct result of the sudden withdrawal of federal support for roles that have become essential in our schools. In many cases, these positions were fully funded through Jordan's Principle and are no longer financially sustainable without that support. ECE's response. In response to the recent changes to Jordan's Principle, the Department of Education, Culture and Employment has taken a proactive and multifaceted approach to support schools, students, and families across the NWT. We prioritize consistent communication with education bodies, ensuring they are informed of developments, funding decisions, and available supports. This has helped schools plan and adapt in real time despite the uncertainty. The Minister and Department have also engaged in a lot of advocacy, including Minister Cleveland and Minister Semler issuing a joint statement to highlight the critical role Jordan's Principle plays in northern communities, joint advocacy between Minister Cleveland and the ministers in Nunavut and Yukon, direct engagement at the highest level between the Premier and the Prime Minister, Minister Wozniak with a letter to her federal counterpart, the Minister of Finance, Federal Minister of Finance, and the Minister's call on education bodies to work together on solutions, and officials' advocacy across all levels. This stance reinforces our commitment to equitable access to education and student supports and follows in-person meetings with the federal ISC minister in Ottawa to discuss this issue. We've issued a formal call for federal reconsideration, urging Indigenous Services Canada to reverse the administrative changes that have led to funding denials and service disruptions. Our position is clear. These supports are not supplemental, they are essential. At the same time, we remain grounded in a commitment to collaboration. We want to work closely with education partners and federal counterparts to co-develop a model that reflects the realities of the North and ensures that Indigenous students continue to receive the supports they need to thrive. These actions reflect our ongoing dedication to equity, inclusion, and student access, even in the face of significant funding challenges. Planning for the 25-26 school year. Despite these difficult decisions, our focus remains on delivering core educational services. That's a slide there. These operational responses are necessary to ensure continuity and stability during this transitional period. Some education bodies are not impacted to the same degree, particularly if their education support assistance were funded from multi-year agreements that continue through the current school year. Education bodies have prioritized service continuity planning, working closely with staff and families to ensure that core supports remain in place where possible. This includes helping schools adjust staffing and programming to maintain essential services. Education bodies are also reassessing applications ahead of deadlines, reviewing previously submitted requests to ensure they align with the new federal criteria. Where appropriate, ECE is supporting education bodies in strengthening or resubmitting applications to improve the likelihood of approval. In cases where funding has been denied, education bodies are actively pursuing appeals to Indigenous Services Canada, documenting the impacts and advocating for reconsideration based on the needs of students and communities. At the same time, we're integrating these developments into our broader inclusive schooling review, using this moment to evaluate how we deliver supports and ensure our model remains responsive and equitable. Finally, we remain committed to continued collaboration and advocacy. We want to work with Indigenous partners, education bodies, and federal counterparts to co-develop a model that reflects the realities of Northern communities and ensures that no child is left behind. These actions reflect our commitment to protecting student supports and maintaining stability during a time of significant change. ECE remains committed to safeguarding education. We recognize that any erosion of support in this sector will have long-term consequences for the well-being and success of our children and youth. As we move forward, the Minister will continue to advocate for the resources our schools need, not only to maintain current programming, but to build a stronger, more equitable education system for the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fulford. I will now go to members for discussion. Mr. Morse.
Thank you. Thanks for the briefing. Sounds like lots of work is happening behind the scenes. Do you have any idea yet how much funding has been or will be? I realize this is going to be a difficult one to answer, but are you getting an idea of a ballpark for how much funding is being restored? It sounded like we were sitting at close to $56 million a year. That's a huge amount of money, supporting what I would guess is hundreds of staff. Just how big is the impact going to be, in your knowledge right now, for the 2025-26 year?
Okay, so we'll go to Minister.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, on that one, of course, every year is different, where the applications that go in for Jordan's Principle and Inuit Child First are reflective on the needs of students in that particular school year. So we are aware of confirmed losses in regards to classroom assistants, and potential losses in regards to classroom assistants. But as far as the entire impact, we don't have a good view into that as at this point, because there is still so much in limbo and so much pending on regards to applications that are in with ISC. Thank you.
Mr. Morris.
Thank you. Okay. The next thing I'm wondering is there are a number of support services provided by GNWT staff in schools, particularly occupational therapists, speech language pathologists. Are we considering increasing those services or looking at how those services can help to fill at least some of the gaps, considering this is something we already offer?
Minister Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In short, yes. Minister Semler and I are working very closely together with our officials from both of our departments, acknowledging that this is one of the areas that will be impacted, that has a huge effect on students across the Northwest Territories. And there is a large demand and a large need for therapeutic services in our schools, especially after COVID. And so, yes, this is something that we are working on diligently right now and with urgency. Thank you.
Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I was missed during the introduction, but excited and happy to be here as always. That said, one of the questions I have in particular was raised by a constituent who it's been raised a couple times, but I was speaking with a constituent a few days ago, and she told me the only way that they can access this service is on reserve. But they live here in Yellowknife and they go to one of the schools. I won't get any more detail because I don't want to in some way identify the individual family or the individual child. That said, the way it was described earlier is you didn't necessarily have to be on the reserve, but if you were in the city, for example, you had to go through the department. How do these parents access these services in a way that is reflective of that? So in other words, she was denied support for her children, and she said we went basically from an introverted child due to the supports and the programs to an extroverted child that had started learning and moving and advancing in a way that they had never seen before. And so they're extremely afraid that the child will revert back to the original or previous way of living. And of course, as many of us know, maybe not all of us know, but I've certainly experienced it as a parent. So any types of support services and strengthening of a child's ability to grow and grow into who they're really meant to be, now is the time. No therapeutic services will be offered as they are an adult that can replace the ability to help them at a young age. So in other words, an ounce of prevention certainly can help, a pound of cure. So that's sort of my first area about trying to access funding and support off reserve. Thank you.
Mr. Cleveland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So when the changes were announced to Jordan's principal, focus to maintain services on reserve was one of the items that was highlighted. In addition, there was announcements from the federal government that you would need a healthcare provider in order to sign off on recommendations, that they would go from multi-year funding agreements to single-year funding agreements, that they would no longer do groupings of students. It would have to be individual applications. And in the initial meeting that Minister Semler and I had with Minister Golmasti, we were able to sit down and really emphasize the difference between provinces across this country and territories. And territories absolutely are different. We function differently. We have different needs. And we also, I don't need to explain to everybody in this room, we sit in an inequitable position compared to provinces. And so this was something that we were able to stress to the federal minister that, for example, the Northwest Territories is not made up the same way that a lot of our provinces are. that focusing on approvals through healthcare providers in a lot of especially small communities is going to be very troublesome, that it will be very challenging for people to get that approval through healthcare providers. It will create additional bottlenecks on our healthcare system in regards to, single year versus multi-year funding agreements. It will just increase the administration requirements of programming for a lot of schools that are already taxed. And so we were able to go through each of these elements of the changes and really address them with the federal minister. And I have to say, I was given a lot of hope in that conversation. There was a lot of interest in understanding not just the Northwest Territories, but also being able to speak with a minister who is Indigenous herself, comes from a small community, and also acknowledge that there is a need to support Indigenous students or Indigenous children across this country, regardless of what their address is. And so the conversations have given me hope. Certainly we need to continue to have these conversations and continue to pursue those differences, because absolutely agree with the MLA. The territories is built differently, and we need to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the minister for the comments. The other aspect is what is she doing from a we'll call it a temporary funding gap sort of effort, in the sense of working with the Department of Finance here, knowing that we extended our borrowing debt limit, so the government does have some money to make up some of these initiatives that are being lost. I'm not in a position to know them specifically well enough to say we'll pick this one and cover that one, and we'll let this one go. I think our experts can tell us where we'll get better value if the territorial government steps in. But ultimately, we have, if I understand correctly, and I'll just be quick here, Mr. Chairman, is the fact that I think we have something in the range of 81 positions falling off. That affects our schools, that affects our communities, and not just Yellowknife, it's Sawtooth and other places, as well as the fact that the ripple effect that has an impact. And that now I'm only getting to the students now, to the next phase of the funding loss, which is every one of those individual children at large will be significantly, if not negatively, set back. Is there a way to identify some money through the Department of Finance as a one-time stopgap measure that we can sort of bridge into the at least for the next few months, and for us as a territorial government to put in a claim with ISK and expect or demand and certainly request through our member of parliament or the prime minister and certainly the other officials in order to get that money filled. Because I mean, frankly, we're running out of time before the school year starts. I'd be at a loss to imagine these people are standing around waiting for their jobs to show up at the last minute. Eventually, these people and individuals are going to have to make tough choices. And I fear the Northwest Territories and the children will suffer without the government stepping up, even in a temporary method. Thank you.
Minister Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can assure the member and committee, as well as the public, that this is being approached with an all-of-government response. It's not just myself and Minister Semler that are advocating. Every minister has advocated in regards to Jordan's Principle and Inuit Child First across our cabinet and to their counterparts, even to, for example, our economic development counterparts, and the broader impact this will have on the economic goals of the federal cabinet. And as was mentioned in the presentation, the Minister of Finance is also speaking with her counterpart. The Premier is also speaking with the Prime Minister. So this has been raised at every table and at every level, given its importance to the territory and given its potential negative impact to students right across the territory. That also stressed by the fact that, we are not a province. We don't have the same ability to keep own source revenues and to pivot at the same way that a province may have that ability. That said, I am also working closely at my level, but also through officials with education bodies across the territory, having conversations. And like the MLA said, we need to make sure that we're involving the experts in these conversations, and that's absolutely right. It's important that we understand the how in this and how we can address this monumental change. And so working with those experts to understand what that can look like going forward into this school year and how those supports might be able to be addressed is critical. And so that is something that work that continues. And then at the same time, understanding that our student body has changed drastically, especially since COVID and especially since inclusive schooling directives and policies were originally put in place. We're in the process of completely reviewing our inclusive schooling policy. And that's where the funding for classroom assistance comes from. We do invest over $33 million a year in funding classroom assistance across the territory through that policy, but also ensuring that we are completely reviewing the way that inclusive schooling works across the territory. And I have to stress the importance of being able to maintain our education system in the face of that review, because if we can completely change how we're operating while we're trying to evolve how we're operating, then we're not starting from a clean baseline. And so certainly something that we continue to work towards. We're very live to the fact that the school year is about to start and are working as quickly as we can, but making sure that we're going through this with the right people at the table and feeding into the process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So certainly, I mean, obviously this is devastating to the NWT school system. I do hear clearly that our Minister Cleveland and other ministers have been doing their best to advocate with the federal minister. Mr. Cleveland, when you say that your conversation gave you hope, that there seemed to be openness to learning about the NWT, can you give us a sense of what were the next steps or commitments that came out of that conversation? Like, was it just left open-ended that they would think about it, or was there a commitment made to review the policy or to come back at a certain point with an answer or a change? Or can you give us a sense of anything tangible that's underway in terms of next steps with your federal counterparts? Thank you.
Minister Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the federal government has committed to acknowledging, first of all, they've acknowledged the urgency of this situation. They've also acknowledged the difference in the territories and the difference in our circumstances. They've acknowledged that, and I think one of the key things there, acknowledging that regardless of the address of an Indigenous child, their needs still need to be considered. And so really distinguishing between, on reserve and off reserve, and that not being the ultimate deciding factor and criteria, which would have a huge impact on the territory. And so what they've come back with is they are working on what this process is going to look like and working on creating certainty within their shift in criteria for Canada, but also for the territories. There is a lot of work happening as well between executive and Indigenous affairs, not just from education, culture, and employment, and officials at the federal level. And so they've committed to coming back to us, but I don't have a date of what that does look like, and am committed to making sure that I keep committee informed as to what that does look like, but still waiting to learn when that certainty does come, but we continue to have those conversations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I continue to be unclear where there's actual uncertainty and where there is just new certainty that is unfavorable and devastating to us. You've spoken a lot about uncertainty, but it seems they've been quite clear that they're not funding sort of group applications anymore. They don't want to give funding directly to schools, it has to be to individuals. Is there actual uncertainty about that, or we just don't like the answer that they've given us? I mean, and when you say that there's uncertainty about staffing levels in NWT schools the coming year, is there uncertainty, or we've just reduced staffing? It seems that is certain in my mind, but maybe you can explain where there's actual uncertainty and where it's just that changes have been made that are really bad to our system. Because I think it actually is helpful to clarify between uncertainty and, damaging changes. Thank you.
Some may call those cuts, Minister, but we'll let you respond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, I would say that there is both unfavorable decisions and uncertainty. So when we look at, some of the decisions that have been made, absolutely, when you look at multi-year versus individual year, that would be an unfavorable decision. When you have uncertainty, we have applications that are still being approved in a system where they said they weren't going to support. So we still have applications that are being approved in the education system. And so even the Human Rights Tribunal has recognized the need for clear guidelines and better coordinations with provinces and territorial governments. And so there's an acknowledgement even from the Human Rights Tribunal that there is uncertainty within the program and within the criteria. And so there is work that does need to be done in order to provide that certainty, because when one education body gets an approval and another one gets a denial, that creates uncertainty in the system when they're asking for ultimately the same types of positions to be filled for some of largely the same challenges between education bodies. In addition, we would see that Inuit Child First received a one-year freeze while they work through the challenges of the program, whereas Jordan's Principle has not. And that's one of the things that we have consistently asked for and advocated for is, yes, we acknowledge that there is abuse within the system and need for clearer guidelines. We want to be part of that conversation, and we want to be supporting the federal government through that work, but ask that our system not be upended in that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Yakalaya.
Good morning, and thank you for the presentation. Question I have is, I didn't hear you mention the Metro Education Authority in your presentation. Can you tell me why? Thank you.
Minister Cleveland.
Thank you very much. We have received, we've asked our education bodies to feed into the process and to let us know what the impacts will be. We have not heard from every single education body on their specifics of their data. And because the applications go directly from the education bodies themselves to the federal government, we really rely on those relationships to understand the impacts and the finer details. Thank you.
Ms. Yakalaya.
Oh, okay, thank you for that. Also, my other question is, Jordan's Principle is very important to the people in the communities, especially in the small communities where it's going to have a great impact on the students and as well as the classroom and how things operate. Have you do you know anything about if the Indigenous governments are doing anything about what's going on with the decisions that the federal government is making, and are they working with the territorial government at because you are right when you say that the territories we're unique in how we operate here. The southern provinces all have reserves. We have two, and we're not on reserve, so the relationship is different. It's created differently. So that needs to be, I mean, I'm sure the federal government already know that that's how it is for us over here. So sometimes funding is not allocated to the north because we're not on reserve. So have you worked with the indigenous governments on this? That's my question. Thank you.
Mr. Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Emily Yakalaya for the question. I am incredibly thankful to Indigenous governments and organizations for their support that's been afforded in this conversation. Everything from traveling to Ottawa with us and sitting at the table with us and leading this conversation to writing their own letters and explaining to the federal government the impacts that they will see in their own communities. And so, and then in addition to that, also, this is, as you can imagine, a huge conversation at the Council of Leaders table as well, and working with Council of Leaders on this. And so the partnership with Indigenous governments in this conversation is incredibly important. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Narasu, floor is yours.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for the presentation. My question was similar to Ms. Yakalaya. Jordan's principle was implemented through the courts, and our education system needs to be assisted, by every means possible, including all levels of government. That includes the indigenous governments, the territorial, and also the federal. My question was, how optimistic are you in having the federal government reconsider its decision? And I was going to ask about the indigenous governments too, their involvement, but you've already answered that question. And I know the GTC is having their assembly next week, and I will see if this topic is even discussed, and if not, I will see if I can bring it to their attention that, this is very important. I've been hearing from constituents about saying that, they've seen real progress since the program has been initiated, and now they're worried about what's going to happen. Will the students and the system start to see a decline in the progress that they have witnessed? And I've been receiving calls, and I've been telling them that this is a federal funded program. But I've understood that the NWT ECME have been actively trying to have the government reconsider its decision. The criteria of the program too is very important, because I've worked at the community government level, and since this program has been initiated, and I've seen how this money was spent, and I've always wondered how long it would take before the government, start to reconsider it, and it's come to the point now that it's being reconsidered. So my question is, how optimistic are you in having the federal government reconsider its current decision? Thank you.
Mr. Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, it's difficult for me to put words into the federal government's mouth or to predict where they might go. But I'm 100% certain that our cabinet is not going to stop on this conversation, that there is a definite need for certainty, but also to ensure that the federal government and provinces and territories are working together. It is incredibly important for us that the federal government acknowledge and understand the differences in territories and provinces, especially in this conversation. And I do think that this leads into other broader topics of conversation as well down the road. But I can assure members in this committee and the public, that this conversation is one that will continue to receive urgency and continue to receive attention from all of cabinet. Thank you.
Mr. Narasu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of the funding has been allocated like through the programs that's set up in I know in my communities within the Mackenzie Delta, and I'm sure some of these acquisitions or purchases haven't been met with great deal with the federal government. I've seen purchases that, you know, clothing, sure, that's essential for our part of the region or part of Canada. But hitting the schools is something that is not very welcome by anyone, especially in our part of the Northwest Territories, even Northwest Territories as a whole. Maybe setting and presenting counter criteria for these programs may be something looked at, so that our programs within the school system would not suffer as much. Would that be something of an option? Thank you.
Mr. Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So our biggest draw on Jordan's principle in the Northwest Territories is for support assistance, and the program or directive within the Department of Education, Culture and Employment that drives the funding for support assistance is our inclusive schooling policy, and we're currently doing a review of the inclusive schooling policy. We later this fall will have the results of the work that was done earlier this year. And so really focusing on that as far as how we, you know, reflect some of this funding within our own system, and also working with, going back to MLA Hawkins' comments, working with our experts to, you know, within communities and within the school system to understand how we can evolve that approach to support within classrooms to what our student body needs right now, what our students across the territory need right now is going to be critically important to the next steps and what funding looks like in classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I will have some questions, and then we'll have a second round if folks would like to ask more. Jordan's principle is, as you've said, I think as everyone recognizes, fundamental to the success of Indigenous kids in the Northwest Territories. My office as an MLA has seen many applications, and we've actually developed basically a liaison relationship with the federal ministers of the program, which I didn't expect, but it shows the need. And meeting with education authorities in Yellowknife as well, which is the constituency I represent, it was very clear that both school boards are highly dependent on this funding. So you and Minister Semler have called for a one-year kind of pause to the changes, so the education systems can figure out what goes next with all these changes. I'm assuming the federal government has declined that request because we haven't heard anything in the positive. But we do have our own resources. We have an enhanced borrowing limit. In the case of Yellowknife, at least, one school district has multi-year funding. That's YCS, the Catholic schools. So they are not going to see any decreases to educational assistance or Jordan's principal funding. But in the case of the District 1, they are on single-year funding. That's expiring, and that's why we're hearing about the layoffs to their educational assistance. So will this government consider a one-year funding bridge while you continue to negotiate with Ottawa? Obviously, that's a large amount of money, but we're talking about the success of Indigenous kids who suffer from inequity, who suffer from an inadequate education system when you look at graduation rates and other measures of academic achievement. So will you consider bridging funding while we continue to negotiate with Ottawa, at least for the upcoming school year? Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, just to be clear, I haven't asked for a 1 year. I haven't put a time limit on it. I've asked for them to pause the changes while they're to pause any change to Jordan's principle while they're reviewing the criteria and the guidelines of the program, but I haven't put a timeline on it, just so that everyone is clear, just in case the federal government is listening as well. And you're right, I have not heard back from them on that. There's not been a commitment to do it that way. But I think that there is huge wins to be had for everybody involved, for us all to be working together on that. In regards to what we as cabinet are in the process of doing, we are looking at absolutely everything, but really it's crucial that I work with education bodies on what that can look like. For example, some of the classroom assistants are tied to supports for therapeutic services, and all of them are tied to specific students who may have graduated, who may not be in the system. And so it isn't, a 1 + 2 = 3 kind of scenario. It's a very layered impact. And there's not kind of one move that answers all of the needs of every education body. And so I'm working closely with education bodies. I've put to them, how does this look in order for us to be successful together? And we'll continue to have those conversations with them, understanding that we are under the gun, but for us as cabinet to make a decision unilaterally without the education bodies at the table and feeding into that process would not be ultimately the best thing for students across the territory. And so it's critical that I continue those conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Perhaps we'll disagree on that, because I think there is one solution, which is restoration of the funding. And that's essentially what I'm speaking about in some reduced form, even if it's just the largest component, which is the support assistance. Those support assistants, if they're missing out of the system, it's going to create more pressures on classrooms, more pressures on teachers, and lead to wider problems throughout the system. Money is the answer here, and talk is cheap, right? We can talk about all the solutions and the evolution of systems and things like that, but if we're not willing to spend our own, if money's off the table and the only place it can come from is the federal government, we're going to let these kids down at a certain point. And I'm not saying that's sustainable in the long run, but we just increased the borrowing limit for situations like this. So with an eye to the long-term solutions to how this funding works. You've talked about the presentation talked about co-developing a model that works in the north. It seems like the old model was working quite well. There was inadequate funding for these support, the educational assistance for therapeutic supports in school, like speech language pathology, all these kind of things that aren't available, that districts have brought on for themselves. The idea behind Jordan's principle, as a principle, was that if you keep arguing over jurisdiction, then in the case of Jordan Rivers, someone can die, right? Because governments are fighting over jurisdictional lines and not actually helping people. So this was not designed as a federal program just to help just to help Indigenous kids. It was designed as a model that breaks down jurisdictional things, gets the money into the hands of people who need it most, and then you sort things out afterwards. So what are we doing on our part to sort that out? Because I think we obviously have fewer own source resources, as you said, but we have a higher TFF than provinces get. We have more equalization, essentially, than what a province gets. So we have our own fiscal resources. We haven't changed the inclusive funding formula, to my knowledge, substantially since the rollout of junior kindergarten. I know you're reviewing that right now, but you talk to school boards, and there's a lot of these programs that haven't been funded, haven't been reviewed, and they're having to find resources otherwise. So we can keep saying it's Ottawa's responsibility to fund all these things, but we have a responsibility as well to support education, and we've kept a lot of our formulas with respect to these particular issues at the same level or not funded at all. So what is our obligation to kind of step up to the plate as well? Because we have put the ball squarely in the federal court, but we have some part to play. And if you can speak to that, Minister Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, just in regards to your comments about the first question, I think it's critical there to just acknowledge that I didn't say that dollars are off the table. My comments there were really focused on the fact that we need to work very closely with education bodies, because it's not just about, you know, putting exactly as is everything that was, because these supports speak to particular needs of particular students, and students move around, they shuffle, students graduate, students leave school systems, new students come in. And so ensuring that we're working closely with education bodies is crucial to make sure that we're actually addressing the needs in the schools and the education bodies themselves. In regards to what we're doing for the fact that our education system continues to evolve, that our students continue to evolve, the inclusive schooling policy that is currently in place within the Northwest Territories was set in 2014. And so over the course of the last decade, we know as society that youth have changed drastically in the last 10 years. The influences on students, student needs, students even post-COVID have changed. The landscape of education is different and our needs are different. And so we know that there needs to be a review done, and we're in the process of doing that. It's also critical to acknowledge that when Jordan's principal first came on board, the way that it was distributed, it was, we see gradually that there was a realization at different points from different education bodies that funding was accessible for different things in different ways, and that the access to those funds really ballooned over the years. And so, you know, there are certain things that Jordan's principal will fund and certain things that it won't. And that doesn't mean that those are the supports that education systems at the end of the day want or need. There might be another way for them to address that wasn't open to funding through Jordan's principal. And so making sure that we're doing this review from a much more holistic standpoint that really gets to what are our needs within the education system, what are our needs of our students across the territory is critical. And so that is the work that we're very much into the weeds of right now within the department, in order to make sure that we are addressing the needs of our student body. And there's both the work for inclusive schooling that's happening with education, culture, and employment and education bodies. And then there's also the work with Minister Semler and the Health and Social Services Department in regards to therapeutic services. And so there are multiple aspects that are funded through Jordan's principal right now that we are in the process of moving these pieces forward within the departments and within the government of the Northwest Territories. And I think that is going to be critical. And one of the frustrating parts is that while we're in the process of doing these things, we're having these other funding supports kind of really jeopardized. And when you're trying to evolve a system, you know, making mass changes midway through is so counterproductive. And so that is another piece that we're trying to explain to the federal government. We're in the process of doing this work. Please do not crumble this system that we're currently working with, because it's hard to evolve something that is evolving in its own way in such a drastic nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Finally, I might come back to these points, but Minister Galmasty made a public commitment to revisit Jordan's principle in the fall, and I guess federal financial update or budgetary, whatever budgetary cycle they're in at that time. That's kind of all we know. We don't know what she's looking at, what they're particularly looking at, but we do have that commitment that they're going to revisit it. So can you shed any light on what specifically she's speaking of? You've spoken of your extensive advocacy and conversations and hope for the future. What exactly is she talking about when she says she's going to revisit the funding model? Minister Cleveland.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So the fall is their budgeting cycle. And so we know that the minister has committed to reassessing their criteria and their guidelines in order to provide some parameters around the way that Jordan's principal is currently flowing from the federal government right now. So I would expect in the fall to see a lot more certainty and clarity in those guidelines. And we will continue to reach into her office to make sure that we're up to date on what those might be, so that we can share them publicly with the territory and specifically with education bodies.
Thank you, Minister. Members? Mr. Morris.
Thank you. Yeah, just with regards to if the territory is going to step in with any funding to cover the gap for education assistance and all these various conversations that are happening with the federal government, I would just note that what I'm hearing is a huge amount of uncertainty with the school year a few weeks away. And so do we have any indication as to when ECE is going to get clear about what it will and won't be able to support? And furthermore, is there any indication from the federal government if they're going to be able to get clear with anyone, or are we just effectively going to go into the school year with a bunch of questions hanging over our heads? Because I have a feeling that I don't think the impact of this is lost on anyone, but I have a feeling it's going to hit pretty hard with the beginning of the school year, and it'll become very evident very quickly how big the gap is that's being left by this program being defunded. So yeah, that's the main question for me is at what point are we going to be able to start providing some certainty, as Emily Morgan noted, good or bad, so people can be aware of what they're going to be facing in a few weeks.
Minister Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the conversations with the federal government will continue, and I have, no control on their timelines and when their announcements might be. In regards to the conversations that I continue to have with education bodies, they certainly become at times more challenging in the summer while people are off from education bodies, but knowing that schools come back imminently, those conversations, really take flight in the next couple of days here. And so those conversations will continue, but I need to solidify pieces with education bodies prior to any type of public commitments to make sure that we're, working closely together, with essentially our subject matter experts who are the ones in charge of delivering education at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morris.
Okay. Recently, the department announced changes to the Child and Youth Counseling Program. That was also a fairly controversial decision and resulted in a lot of counselors being pulled out of the schools. Is there any consideration of revisiting that program redesign, considering the consultants recommended the total opposite of what the department ended up doing, and now that other supports are being reduced in the schools, would the minister reconsider the decisions that were made around that program redesign?
Mr. Cleveland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, the redesign of the program happened following unanimous decisions from the education bodies at the time. And then at the time, Minister of Education and Minister of Health and Social Services agreed to address the unanimous call for action from education bodies. And so the school-based mental health and wellness program is something that is always on every single agenda that for meetings that I have with education leaders. And I have stressed to them over and over again that the success of this program is a priority for me. And so there is ample opportunity for requested changes to come from education bodies in regards to that. I can say that based on things that I've heard to date from education bodies, I have pursued right away, but that an overall, like an overhaul of the entire program has not been requested by education bodies, but continuing to ensure that they're evolving what those supports look like is critical. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morris, you want another one?
Oh, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Yakalaya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because we have so much uncertainty right now, I'd like to ask the minister, what would be the implications and impacts to communities should this program not continue? or we get minimal funding. I guess people need to know in the territory how this is going to impact them should things don't go the way we need it to go. It's like we keep talking about how important and critical this Jordan principle is to the communities. So can you just give me if it doesn't, if things don't work out? Thank you.
Minister Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 68% of the funding that we receive from Jordan's Principal in the Northwest Territories directly funds classroom assistance or support assistance in classrooms across the territory. So those support assistants fill roles with everything from supporting speech language pathologists, supporting students' behavioral needs, supporting literacy programming with students. And so the biggest impact that people would see across the territory is less bodies in the classroom to support the learning of students. Over the course of the last few years, we have seen an increase in graduation rates of 6% in small communities specifically. And I can say without a doubt and without any reservation that I am absolutely not prepared to lose momentum in that. Thank you.
Ms. Yagalaya.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And what impact would this have on the GNWT, specifically ECE, income support? Thank you.
Ms. Cleveland.
Thank you so much. It would be very difficult for me to answer that question without knowing specifically for each person, you know, if they are impacted by this, what their next plan is. And so it would be difficult for me to venture a guess on that one at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Yagalaya, do you have another?
I guess, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was thinking about it because if this is impacted, then it's going to put a huge push on ECE for specifically for income support, because if families don't have the support workers in the classrooms don't have the jobs, so it's going to put a push, or it's going to impact income support in our communities, and this is not where we want to go. So it's I guess I look at it from that way, because there's a cause and effect. When you have people lose jobs, there's an effect on the whole system and even on the economy of the Northwest Territories. So it's critical that we, really work to ensure that we are getting funding for the schools in the Northwest Territories. It's more of a comment than I just wanted to stress that it will have an impact on the system, on the whole system, and for people in the communities. Thank you.
Ms. Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Definitely hear the member's comment and take her point that this is a multifaceted conversation for sure.
Mr. Nersu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The advocating for this program to be continued is very important. I've never heard from the leaders on this discussion or brought any light into this discussion on how they are involved. But I've been hearing from just citizens and residents of communities on what's happening. What is the government of the Northwest Territories doing? But I'd like to get the Indigenous governments, the local governments, the regional governments, and territorial Indigenous governments all involved in advocating on behalf of, especially the schools. I don't want the school system to be hit with any funding cuts or loss of support staff. Is there a website where these regional or all levels of Indigenous governments can advocate on behalf of the schools within the Northwest Territories? Thank you.
Minister Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, in regards to, is there a website, the GNWT does not have kind of an advocacy link that they create on a web page. I can assure the member, though, that through Council of Leaders, that all Indigenous governments and Indigenous organizations participate in Council of Leaders and are certainly advocating through that space. Multiple Indigenous governments traveled to Ottawa along with Cabinet, and we were all together in these meetings. There are multiple Indigenous governments who have also written letters of advocacy that they have copied me on as well. And so I can assure the member that there are multiple Indigenous governments that are part of this conversation, which I am incredibly grateful to. And certainly the conversation has not ended there. There was a trip just recently with a number of senior federal cabinet ministers to the Northwest Territories, and I know that Jordan's principal was part of these conversations as well, and that there are future trips to Ottawa planned, and Jordan's principal will certainly be part of those conversations, and Indigenous governments will also be included in that trip, as it is a Council of Leaders trip. Thank you.
Mr. Narasu?
I'm good now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Narasu. Ms. Morgan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the ministers emphasized really clearly that the funding that we're talking about that was provided to schools for classroom assistance, school support staff, and therapeutic supports, that is essential and it's not supplemental. The problem is that if we're arguing to the feds that this kind of funding is actually sort of core or essential funding to our school system, Jordan's principle was always intended to be supplemental funding. I mean, probably in this naive, idealistic idea that the system generally works well, but there's just a few students here and there that fall behind or can't, face challenges or inequities, and if we just fund a few individuals here and there, then everybody will sort of be at this equal status. Whereas we have, systemic challenges with our system. But it seems clear to me that the kind of funding solutions we're talking about will never come from sort of individual applications, that we need a rethink of how our school systems are funded. And it's also clear that we're not necessarily capable as a territory of fully funding our education system to the level that our students need and deserve. But as far as I understand, the feds don't see it as their responsibility to, offer core funding to education systems. That's the responsibility of territories and provinces. Obviously we have overall territorial formula funding, but there, as far as I understand, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have specific sort of core funding for education that's transferred from the feds to the territory to cover our core and essential needs in our system. I know you've asked the federal minister for a pause on the changes and the review to this particular funding pot, but is there also discussions about a more sustainable sort of overall way of funding our inclusive schooling system that involves ongoing, essentially core funding from the feds to help us provide the core essential aspects of our education system that's going to allow all of our students to succeed? I don't know if that's clear, but is that part of the conversation? Is there openness to that, or is the conversation with the feds still just kind of nitpicking around how we can try to restore this model of offering a few individuals here and there funding, with this idea that if we just help a few individuals catch up, that sort of everything will be fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Cleveland?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to back up a little bit on this one here. And so when our inclusive school, our approach in the Northwest Territories to inclusive schooling was developed, it centered around program support teachers, supporting classroom teachers in order to deliver education. We then, around, a few years into that model, had the federal government introduce, through the Human Rights Tribunal decision, Jordan's principal funding. Through the federal government, through ISC, they established that they would, they basically chose to fund classroom assistance to address education gaps across the country. And interestingly, it had a fundamental shift in the way that education was delivered in the territory in our classroom. And so you end up with this federal program that actually kind of encroached in territorial jurisdiction, what intentionally or unintentionally, right? On the way that education was delivered in the territory, because all of a sudden you had $60 million of funding funneling into the territory, 68% of which was for classroom assistance, and it had a fundamental change in inclusive schooling. And so it is, whether or not, right or wrong or anything else, it changed the way that inclusive schooling works in the territory. And so part of the drive of that and what the member is getting at is absolutely there's a need to look at a more sustainable model. And so in doing that, we're doing the review of inclusive schooling. And then the member, I think, is kind of then veering off into a much broader conversation around the TFF and the negotiations on the territorial funding formula. And so that is certainly always top of mind. The needs of the territory continue to change. The way that the federal government funds programs continue to change and has an impact on what was originally included in the territorial funding formula. And so those negotiations, certainly between the GNWT and the federal government, are something that is going to certainly be top of mind when we also consider this whole conversation as well. But I think it's important to reflect on the fact that this program did have a fundamental shift in how education was delivered in the territory, and ensuring that our programs evolve as well in order to kind of meet where we are today and meet where we need to be, and use those best practices and lean on our education bodies to figure that out is going to be critical as well.
Ms. Morgan?
Thanks to the minister for that. I guess the question, though, is where is the money going to come from? And I know, obviously, in this broader review of inclusive schooling, this education bodies are essential in figuring out what the needs are, but I think it seems pretty clear that the needs are much greater than the GNWT alone is prepared to fund for inclusive schooling. And I don't, I think that that's a pretty safe conclusion. And so then the question is, where's that money going to come from? Is there any indication that, whether through Jordan's Principle or some other formula funding, the feds are open to or prepared to offer an ongoing supplement to our territorial inclusive schooling funding? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Cleveland?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a few things there. First of all, through these Jordan's Principle conversations, there has not been commitments as the minister is referring to. I think it's also critical to reflect on the fact that quite often the federal government has programs that they implement and then those programs get sunset. And we as a territory, we know that we have residents who become, they use those programs, they become used to those programs. We like a lot of the programs, and then we end up really building our government to support those programs. And so when all of a sudden those programs disappear, it has a huge impact in the territory, and one that we then have to decide, are we now going to fund this program, or are we going to let this program go? In the case of education, that is simply not an option. And so, can we make, the $60 million flowing to our education bodies whole as far as Jordan's principle? We do not have those pockets. And that conversation happened with the federal government when they first started flowing these dollars to education bodies years ago, was concern around the sustainability of this program and the sustainability of the way that they were flowing dollars. And so I certainly, can't speak to the federal government and what decision they're going to make. But here in the territory, we need to ensure that students are supported, that we are maintaining our core services at the end of the day, and that we are reviewing how education is delivered at the end of the day. Because one of the things that I think is critical is we put the most dollars per student into our education system in the country. And so when, the comment around this is all about money, I'm not convinced that it strictly is only all about money. I think it's important that we look at how we are delivering education as well, and ensure that it meets the needs of our students, and that it meets the needs of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Okay, so I'll just ask, I guess, a question that gets to the root of at least this education year. Will there be any changes in funding in the upcoming education year to education bodies in the Northwest Territories with respect to educational assistance and any other programs that were funded by Jordan's principal? Minister Cleveland.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, every year our funding to our education bodies fluctuate depending on their student body and depending on our school funding formula. In regards to if you're asking kind of what an initial response will be, I need to first have conversations with the education bodies in the territory to ensure that we're both all on side and that we are working in unison. Because as was pointed out before, these are our subject matter experts and need to ensure that we're ultimately working as a team at the end of the day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Minister. So I guess committee members have talked about the need for certainty. So can you give us, well, I guess that doesn't create any kind of certainty, because what you can do as minister is provide additional resources to these bodies. And I guess if you haven't had those conversations yet, why? Like we're very close to the new school year, and you telling us that the departmental officials and yourself have not convened meetings with education bodies to figure out what the needs are and whether or not you can bring those needs into a financial package or a reallocation of internal resources or whatever jargon we want to use. It's a bit odd to me that that's the response now in response to the question of this upcoming school year. That's missing this funding. How are we going to, support students' needs through that? And we're still talking to education bodies. So can you clarify whether or not you've had any discussions about this, and if you're close to a decision? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, I can assure you that conversations are happening all the time in regards to Jordan's principle at officials level with governments, and in addition to myself with federal ministers, with my counterparts, and I'm also having conversations with multiple chairs as well. I'm not in a position to publicly report on anything here today, but I can assure members that we are working diligently on this. Thank you.
Okay, so just taking the education assistance aside, because I think that that's something that I agree with you that there are so many complicated needs encompassed by Jordan's principle, and that was part of the issue before, that different students are going to have different needs, and that's represented in this funding. But as you said, 68% of the funding was just for educational assistants or staff, essentially support staff, which I think back in the napkin math is around 39 million. But again, that's based on what was used in 24-25. And again, there's different educational bodies have different relation or funding arrangements with Jordan's principle. Like in Yellowknife, again, one district has lost their funding, the other district has multi-year funding. So, you know, it's not necessarily 39 million. It could be somewhere in that range, though. So just for the educational assistants, which are essential to the delivery of education and ensuring that kids aren't being left behind, will the GNWT provide bridging funding for the upcoming school year to support all affected educational assistants? Minister Cleveland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, at this point, what I can definitely say is extensive conversations are happening on the back end, and acknowledging that the school year starts soon, that in the coming weeks, we will have some more information for yourselves and for the public, but I don't have that information for you today.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Hawkins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you picked up exactly where I was going to go, and that was to follow my original set of questions, which was, can the government take steps? So what significant steps is the Department of Education making in collaboration with the Department of Finance to bridge that gap of funding? Because we cannot wait much longer, knowing that the school year is about to start in 2 weeks. If we have any of these educational assistants, whatnot staff members still around who could be employed. I mean, if we wait much longer, we'll be in a position of never being able to get them back. So what steps are being done to identify the dollars and maybe make temporary bridging actions? Could you be more clear on that? Thank you.
Mr. Cleveland.
Thank you very much. We have certainly reached out to every single education body and requested their granular information in regards to Jordan's principal funding, and also specifically in regards to their classroom assistants to understand what their exact losses are, but then also their potential losses, where they've received approved applications, where they've had denied applications, and then also where they have just simply not heard to this point. These conversations are also happening at the cabinet table to ensure that all of cabinet is aware of these impacts. And in addition to that, I've also asked education bodies, what solutions could look like to ensure that we're examining all possible options and all possible solutions here. Because I think it's crucial that I understand from them what they see as the biggest impact for responses to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Hawkins, last question.
In terms of all possible solutions, you mentioned the cabinet table. Are you willing to, or have you submitted to cabinet a request to go to FMB and asking their support for a bridge gap opportunity on this? Because I would take this opportunity to say, I think this is critical. We have money on our borrowing limit to do this as a temporary reprieve, and I want to stress temporary until it gets over. The solution becomes clear, pathway moving forward becomes clear. But given the nature of time, the urgency, and the impact on our students, are you willing to put forward a submission to cabinet so you can take, like I said, to FMB to get their support to temporarily close this gap? Because I think this is the opportunity before we lose any more kids, teachers, schools, assistants, etc. Thank you.
Mr. Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I absolutely share the concern of all committee members. I recognize the urgency of the situation that we're in. The urgency is not lost on myself. It's not lost on any of my cabinet colleagues or officials within the GNWT either. And can assure members that I am considering all options that I have taken action and that I will have further information in the coming weeks for both committee and for the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Seeing no further questions and noting that you have requested a hard stop in about 10 minutes, unless there's some final point of clarification, we will then end our public hearing. Thank you very much to your officials and to yourself for appearing before the committee.
Mr. Chairman, just one.
Sorry,
quick
I do see one hand
clarification.
up. Sorry, Mr. Hawkins, final word.
Yeah, just a clarification. I mean, technically it's a question, but just a quick clarification. Has the department done a hard assessment on the staffing impacts and the ability to recall any of the people that have been laid off? So in other words, we have been talking about 81 employees that may be impacted in various ways. If the school boards were asked today, could we, in theory, hire them all back? Is that even possible at this moment? Thank you.
Mr. Cleveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, these arrangements are specific to school board and would look different in each region and each jurisdiction. So that's a question that I would not have, one blanket response for. Thank you.
Can the minister get it and provide it to committee?
Minister?
Thank you so much. We would not necessarily, because these are potentially, well, they're all going to be under different contract type of arrangements. And so we would not have the granular information on this on kind of the turn of a dime. And if I may, Mr. Chair, I would really like to ensure that department officials are focused on the broader piece of this. And so I can certainly take it away, but I don't want to make a commitment in the event that time is better spent focusing on other funding arrangements. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Hawkins.
I'll just say this comment that a lot of work could be going to nothing. That's all. If there's no one to hire back or to recall, a lot of effort just because in case the water's already passed underneath the bridge. That's why I'm stressing we need to find out even if we can get them back. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. I think the minister understands that point, and whether or not we can determine that will depend on conversations with the education bodies. But committee will deliberate on that point and potentially bring those questions to the minister. So with that, I will thank you for joining us today, Minister Cleveland and your staff, and we will conclude this public hearing on educational supports. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.